Introducing now, we have David Brock Smith, who is a candidate for the Oregon House of Representatives, District 1, and he will give us a brief introduction.
Thank you so much. And I'm your current representative for District 1. Took office in 2017. Prior to that, I was the Curry County Commissioner for Curry County, along with school board and a longtime president director of the Port Orford North Curry County Chamber of Commerce and president of the Port Orford City Council. It's an honor and privilege to serve and work for you as your state representative. For those that do not know, it's a rather large district that starts at Brookings, goes to Charleston, around Coos Bay, over to West Roseburg, down around Winston, down West I-5 to West Cape Junction, with redistricting this year, actually, starting in 2023. We're losing those parts of Josephine County, and it's just going to be all of Curry, and going to roughly 7 Devils, and then east side of Coos Bay, all of Winston and Greene, and then into the Douglas County Fairgrounds. I serve as the assistant leader for the House Republicans. I also serve in my tenure as a legislator. I've served on the Education Committee, the Early Childhood and Family Sports Committee, Economic Development Committee, and now I serve on Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources as vice chair, as well as Ag Land Use and Water. I'm on the Natural Resources Ways and Means Sub Legislative Policy Committee, so everything really natural resources, and probably the lead in the House in my caucus on energy and environment policy for the state. I've been able to work on a number of things. Recently, we passed in 21 my state meat processing inspection bill. Was able to get $2 million to assist our local meat processors to upgrade their facilities. And now we're at a situation where there was just a joint press release with Senator Merkley and myself and others. The USDA has adopted those rules for us, so we can move forward with that program, which will allow local protein to be processed locally. It's always been frustrating to me to have some of the best lamb raised in Oregon, just a few miles down the road, but when I go to the local grocery store, it's from New Zealand. We've been able to work on a number of issues in environmental policy, and I look forward to continuing to do the work that I do for my district and its constituents in the coming year. We have a lot of things to do, and I look forward to moving forward and hitting the ground running as I do for District 1. Thank you.
All right, ready for the questions. The Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has proposed 2 lease areas for floating wind power development. The fisheries community and other stakeholders have expressed substantial concerns regarding placement of these structures in the proposed areas. What is your position regarding this proposal?
Thank you for the question. So I've been the lead on the BOEM process. I drafted the state planning bill and passed the state planning bill for Oregon Department of Energy to actually dive into this issue and talk to stakeholders and look at the pros and cons for offshore wind here in Oregon. I'm the former chair of the Coastal Caucus and drafted the letter for the Coastal Caucus that we submitted to BOEM, pushing back against the deployment of offshore wind in Oregon, off the coast of Oregon. I facilitated and led 6 listening sessions from Astoria to Brookings so that citizens can engage in this process. We've been able to push back on Boehm pretty hard, where Boehm actually had 3 meetings on the coast, which they've never done before during this point in their process in California or on the East Coast. They're now utilizing the NOAA spatial planning tools to moving forward when they're designating their lease areas within the call areas, which is one of the reasons why we haven't received any information on those lease areas yet, because myself and my Coastal Caucus colleagues have really put Boehm on notice that, as well as the public, right, with the conversations that we've had, to make sure that our fishermen are not impacted within these areas, and that we have an opportunity for the ESA, not the ESA, but the environmental review needs to occur in the front, not during and not after the lease areas. And so I'm hopeful that with all of these things moving forward, I'm working together to make sure that we can get some stakeholder engagement on the community benefits and the lease agreements, so that we can set up the fishing mitigation fund. I mean, even Senator Merkley came out recently with some concerns in a letter, but just a few days afterward, President Biden came out and reinforced that he would like to see this offshore wind deployment. So the feds are going to do what they're going to do. We just need to make sure that it benefits our constituents without impacting them in a harmful manner, especially our fishing industry.
You support or oppose the plan to develop a container terminal in Coos Bay. What problems and challenges do you see, if any, with this plan?
Thank you for this question. I fully support the North Point project, as do our U.S. senators and the president. Actually, President Biden, when he was in Oregon just a few months ago, brought it up a couple of times in his speech. The jobs associated with this project will be enormous. The freight alone and the ability to move the freight will be fantastic. And we're going to be doing so all via rail and getting a lot of trucks off the road. The opportunities for this development in our region, really will help address the generations of poverty that we've known for decades. I am a big supporter. There are some situations where the deepening of the channel deepening needs to occur. I like to think of it as the invasive crab eradication program when it comes to the channel deepening. But I know that others are concerned about the eelgrass and so forth, but we'll move forward with that to make sure that our environmental protections are in place. But there's again, just a fantastic opportunity with jobs and good paying jobs, not only during construction, but after the facility is built. It's estimated to have at least 250 full-time jobs moving forward in perpetuity, which then we need to address the housing situation, of course, but I'm sure that'll be a question coming up. So I'll just stop there.
Elected, would you support the Oregon Department of Forestry's Western Oregon Habitat Conservation Plan? Do you think it adequately balances forest product industry interests with environmental interests?
I oppose the HCP, and I have signed on to a legislative letter to the land board in doing so. I believe it does not adequately address the environmental science as well and harvest management. I believe they are very heavy-handed on the environmental side, and in fact, all members of the Coastal Caucus have opposed it, except for Representative Gombert up in Lincoln County. I believe that it needs to go back to the stakeholder groups to come up with a better proposal that balances the environmental impacts to the need for thinning our western states forests to mitigate against disease as well as wildfire. And so I will continue to push on that effort. Oh, not to mention, if I may add, not to mention there's a number of our local mills that rely on those state forest trees for their operations, so that we don't have to import more logs to be processed here in Oregon from Canada and elsewhere.
Do you think Oregon needs to do more to mitigate the changing climate's effects on Oregon's environment and economy? Or should we allow market forces to prevail? What specific policies do you support or oppose?
So I have supported and in fact with that support was able to get, I believe it was close to $10 million for what we call the West Coast Highway charging, EV charging infrastructure. I'm supportive of solar and wind projects, terrestrial solar and terrestrial wind projects, always have been. I was the lead Republican in dealing with cap and trade, and was the co-vice chair of the Joint Committee on Carbon Reduction. I even had I believe that my proposal with which was the Dash 60 to the Senate bill on cap and trade was better, because it looks at the carbon benefits that we have within our natural working lands in the state. Oregon produces about 65 million metric tons of anthropogenic emissions. So everyone driving down the road and even log trucks and so forth, and the industries and businesses. But we our forest, due to legislation that I drafted in 18, now we know that our forests sequester 31 million metric tons. We know that the wood products industry from those processed logs sequester right around 8 million metric tons. So nearly 40 million metric tons of our emissions are captured just in our forests alone. And so when it comes to emissions, I've actually drafted legislation that would help pull cars off the road in the Portland metro area, where you have a lot of emissions and air quality standard issues. And it would add incentives for lower income families to purchase EVs, to where you could have a combined rebate of roughly $15,000 or more to help purchase an electric vehicle, and where this is in the metro area. But my proposal wouldn't even get a hearing because the majority party refused to let it even be discussed in committee. And so I see a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to virtuistic things moving virtuistic once by the majority party in Oregon, because I'm more of a realist, and we need to make sure that we can have that energy policy when it comes to climate also serves our citizens, because a lot of the policies that are occurring really have an impact on our poorest and in the state that can afford higher prices in their electric bills. And I know I'm running out of time to answer this question, but there's a lot of things that are moving forward. The majority party is going to be penalizing natural gas when just a few decades ago we were incentivizing it. And so putting everything by wire is going to be very, very difficult, and we're going to have serious issues with dealing with peak demand and load. We need over 250 gigawatts by 2050 in the Pacific Northwest, and ratcheting down without other fuel sources for generation without supplementing with renewable hydrogen or others is going to be a serious problem moving forward to meet the demand of the customers and ratepayers.
Rural counties in this district are struggling with a lack of resources for sheriff's departments, local police, district attorneys, and public defenders. What, if anything, would you like to see the state legislature do to support law enforcement and the courts?
So I have long been a supporter as a former county commissioner myself, and I was a member of the Association of ONC counties, which Coos and Curry, of course, and Douglas are members of. We really need to get back to making sure the federal government fulfills the 1937 ONC Act and the payments coming to the counties to fund county services to our citizens. I have a legislative concept that would actually look at the counties that are under emergency, financial emergency through the Secretary of State's audit, that would then be able to look at utilizing 3% of special districts resources to fund the assessor's office, therefore, because they're the ones that do the assessment and tax collector, so that we can take the burden off the general fund for that office, because then it also benefits the other special districts that are collecting taxes within the county to be able to get assessments. For example, Curry County assessment rotation is roughly 16 to 20 years when it should be roughly 5 to 6. And so every one of the special districts is losing because of that. I support the Coos County jail levy as the commissioners do in Coos County, for example. And really, when it comes to situations in our rural areas, we need to fix, and I have multiple pieces of legislative concepts that I'm working on to fix the land use systems in our state to allow for more development to occur, therefore more housing, but also a greater tax base to help fund services. There's not a lot, that we can do legislatively, except for the opportunity to make sure the DAs are only the district attorney in himself is funded by the state, but all of his assistant DAs are funded through the county. And so I don't see any opportunity to increase those budgets to fund ADAs. However, again, there should be opportunities, and as a state, we have an opportunity to call on our federal delegation to support the 1937 ONC Act to make sure that our counties are receiving the full funding with inflation and those resources to fund services for our ONC counties, because that's what it was set up for, and that's what should be happening.
What unique qualities and experiences do you possess that make you the best candidate for this position?
Well, thank you. So there's no school for this. There is, I'm a restaurateur by trade. And I'm a third generation individual from Southwest Oregon. I probably have more elected or appointed experience than any other legislator in Oregon. And so I look at that experience on different in different elected positions and in different board positions, and I draw on that all the time when working for you and my constituents within District 1. Those relationships cultivated over the nearly 20 years have allowed us to move not only legislation forward, but to bring resources back to our district. For example, $3 million to the city of Powers, the little city of Powers, to help with their sewer treatment and issues. About $2.8 million to the Port Abandon for their marina replacement. A number of resources, for the Port of Coos Bay. And I'm working with Commissioner Cribbins and Surfrider right now on legislation that would get about $500,000 to help purchase the Lighthouse Beach access, which is a big issue that's going on right now in Coos County. And so as I continue my work, we continue those relationships and cultivate trust and understanding within the building to work across the aisle to get things done. And really a lot of my job is to talk about my rural district and my rural area and my constituents and their needs to my urban legislative counterparts, to have them understand that these sweeping pieces of legislation that are statewide, really that cookie cutter doesn't work in a lot of ways in our area. When we were a county commissioner, the slogan was, if you've seen one county, you've seen one county. And that's very true. And that's very true when you've seen, Brookings is very different than Coos Bay, which is very different than Coquille, right? And so it's moving those situations forward. The relationships that I have, we're going to be going after, the state is going to be receiving billions of dollars in the federal infrastructure money coming in that's going to be divvied out. And so we're going to be going after those resources for bridges and roads and ports and cities and all jurisdictions within my district, to make sure that rural Oregon gets a chunk of that, especially District 1. And I plan on using those relationships to make sure that we can be successful.
In recent years, the state legislature has allocated extensive resources to addressing the problem of housing insecurity in Oregon, but the problem seems to keep increasing. Do you think more funding is needed, and how could the money be used more effectively? How can the state government help local jurisdictions with this problem?
So I believe, and I testified on the House floor, that when rent control passed, that it would have a negative impact, especially on our coastal communities. A lot of our long-term rentals in our coastal communities have been switched over to STRs, or short-term rentals, and we knew that going forward. Because, frankly, if you're renting a house for $1,000 a month or $1,200 a month, and you're as close to the beach as we are, it's desirable you could rent it out for $150 a night and only have to rent it 10 nights out of 30, and you're making your same money. But it's always clean. If there's a broken faucet, it's fixed, and so forth. And so I have legislation that actually repeals rent control because it was poorly written. You're in a situation right now with inflation that literally those landowners could be increasing their rents over 14% come January 1st, which is a dramatic increase. And so without local jurisdictions, in fact, Curry County has just put forth a very strict short-term rental issue. But you mentioned the state has been sitting out money, but really not when it comes to housing. There is resources for behavioral and mental health, which is a serious issue that we have especially in Southwest Oregon, and we work together very quickly to make sure that we could save the Bay Area issue with regards to behavioral and mental health program. And now I have that work group of Bay Area and other stakeholders that are coming together, so that Representative Wright and I we'll have a kind of a Southwest Oregon pilot project and moving forward because the state has failed in its state hospital. And so we can't expect that to be fixed, unfortunately. So really we need a regional aspect and a plan. But really the problem when it comes to housing is not just the short-term rental and the situation with rent control, but it also has to do with land use and the really strict laws regarding the ability to be able to build and the cost associated with doing so. Not just with the cost of lumber and so forth, but the cost of going through the land use process, especially if there's an appeal, really causes a lot of financial burden to just get the ball rolling. I'll finish with, this housing has always been an issue of mine, and so I actually drafted and passed legislation in 2017 that is for multifamily housing, that if you have a developer that wants to build multifamily housing and their rents are associated, once the finished development is done, their rents are associated with 120% or below area median income, then the developer or landowner can then negotiate with the local jurisdiction to basically take, I'm forgetting the word and I apologize, but basically abate the taxes associated with the new development for a period that doesn't exceed 10 years. And so communities and counties around the state are utilizing that today as a tool and incentive to be able to build workforce housing that's affordable for people within their jurisdictions.
What specific programs would you support to nurture stronger economies in the district?
So I'm a big proponent and have legislative concepts in the hopper with regards to CTE programs. One of the things that I mentioned earlier, if they're going to be moving forward with if BOEM's moving forward with offshore wind, then one of the community benefits in the agreement is going to be resources to Southwest Oregon Community College for a underwater dive and welding program so that we can grow those youth here and those jobs here for our youth to learn and then maintain those floating turbines. I have been a big proponent in making sure that we have resources for our career technical education and career coordinated learning. It's a big supporter in, of course, our childcare that is necessary and what we've been able to do over in the Cook Hills School District with the Early Learning Center. And frankly, I was able to get $100,000 for their project that they just opened, which was for their pregnancy and early mother student success center, where they have, we just did the ribbon cutting week before last, and you have new mothers and all of the resources there for those new mothers to bring their child, infant to 29 months to the facility to learn so that they don't have to choose their family over their education. And so there's still other policies that we can move forward to assist. But for me, I've always been a big career technical education guy. We need more plumbers. We need more contractors. We haven't rebound from the '08 recession with contractors. And we need all of those hands on deck in order to meet our housing needs moving forward. And then lastly, we need, we've been driven into this tourism-driven economy away from this natural resource-based economy, but those natural resources are still critically important. And so I passed legislation back in 2019 that would make it so that if a fisherman were to sell their boat, for example, and their license to somebody to be able to make payments, because the banks don't really loan a lot on those type of things. And payments were not, because for them, that's their retirement. This really allows, what the legislation allows is for younger people to get into get into the industry. But it also allows that if there's a default, that the fishermen can get their boat and their licensure back and be able to go out and go fishing again to make their retirement payments, technically.
What legislation, if any, would you support to make childcare more affordable in Oregon?
Thank you for this question. I mean, childcare is not affordable. I have a legislative concept that looks at increasing the number of children per, depending on age, per childcare attendant. As I mentioned earlier, big supporter of the Cook Hill Early Learning Center, which is arguably the largest single childcare facility in the state. And they've actually testified in front of the legislature and in other groups multiple times about what they've been able to do there. Yet, whenever unfortunately, when the resources came from COVID, they got just short of $9,000, which was ridiculous. And after public testimony of mine in committee to the early learning hub, they did increase that by another 18. But really what we've done in Cook Hill is a model for the state where you've been able to take the addition, and this is where I would want the investments to go, where you take the addition to what they did, Cook Hill did there at the Lincoln School, and hire some of the best childcare providers around, and provide them with a safe environment to where parents can take their kids, and parents are taking their kids there all the way, from Bandon. They take them to Cook Hill and go back to work in Bandon. I think modeling this in and around the district is a fantastic idea, and statewide. And giving resources to get it started up is the way to go. To that end, I was able to get in the 21 session $250,000 to the Central Curry School District in Gold Beach to build a program modeled after the Early Learning Center in Cook Hill. And we're moving forward on that. The district is. So I look forward to that replication there, because it's only going to help the folks from Brookings to Port Orford. And so I guess that would be the policy in moving forward for childcare, because it is affordable for parents to take their kids to the Lincoln School of Early Learning. And if we were to model that around the state, it would be affordable for everyone.
What state policies would you support to make healthcare in general more affordable, as well as to make prescriptions cheaper?
So I co-sponsored a piece of legislation with my colleague, Representative Nose, Democrat out of Portland, on prescription drugs and push back against Big Pharma. And we got it passed in the legislature that if Big Pharma wanted to increase, we wanted more, but this is all we could get passed. Unfortunately, everyone likes to, say that, Republicans take money from Big Pharma, but Democrats take money from Big Pharma too. So, unfortunately, the Democrats are in control, and they're the majority party. And so all we could get was a piece of legislation that said that if any pharmaceutical was to increase by more than 10%, they would have to, they would have to come to the legislature with an explanation on why they are increasing the cost of that medication. I'm proud of that bill. We need to do more when it comes to prescription drugs. The price of insulin is ridiculous. The drug's been around a long time, and other medications that people need. I was on the governor's opioid task force as the Republican on the governor's opioid task force, and we have an opioid pain epidemic in the state, and so we need to always continue to work on that. And when it comes to the cost of healthcare, really the cost of healthcare and those increases come from my understanding, and I don't sit on any healthcare committees, so and haven't in the legislature, but it's the malpractice lawsuits that occur drive up the cost of healthcare and insurance across, and so we have in Oregon we cover all kids, right? And we can continue to move forward. But that said, I do not have all the answers when it comes to healthcare because I do not serve on those healthcare committees.
Money was allocated by the state legislature a few years ago to improve access to mental health and addiction care, but those programs have not yet been fully implemented. Meanwhile, access to mental health and addiction care has become more difficult, especially in low population areas like ours. If elected, what would you do to improve this situation for your constituents?
Well, thank you for that. As I mentioned before, there was nearly $700 million that was allocated for behavioral mental health programs in the state. And if I remember correctly, it's not being utilized. The majority party hasn't been pushing it through, and this whole situation has been exacerbated by Measure 110. Locally, we have a situation where we almost lost our behavioral mental health program here at Bay Area Hospital. And as I mentioned, we were able to scramble, and thanks to the CCO stepping up, we were able to get the $2 million necessary to keep the programs running. I then challenged all of our stakeholders within the behavioral mental health areas in Southwest Oregon, with Mr. Moore at the lead at Bay Area, to come up with a plan where we can have a regional solution and a pilot project associated with these programs and how we can implement it. Really, one of the biggest problems is the state hospital is not accepting those long-term care. And so it's a serious problem for our region in order to provide the services and those long-term services that are needed, really to get people the help moving forward. And so we're still working on that legislation. Those people are much smarter than in this area than me. I am facilitating the concept, and will be Representative Wright and I will be moving it forward to get not only the resources. The state really does a really good job of giving you the money to build it, but it doesn't give you the money to run it. And so it's going to be a lot of stress on making sure that we have the resources not only to make sure that there's the adequate facilities here in Southwest Oregon to deal with these issues, but that there's resources and adequate resources to help facilitate and run the programs necessary for it to be successful.
Final question. There is a measure on the ballot that seeks to prevent walkouts by legislators attempting to prevent votes on legislation they don't support. Will you vote for that measure? Do you promise to attend when the legislature is in session, regardless of what matters are before it?
Well, so this is the most partisan question so far from the league, unfortunately. It's not your right to know what I vote for or not vote for. It. You should have reworded that a little differently. But I'm happy to tell you that initiative is so poorly written. I won't vote for it on the basis of how poorly it's written. And I'll tell you why. It says not that if, so we're going into a session for 160 days. That is the long session. The way the wording of this initiative is is that if you miss 10 days of that 160, that you're disqualified from running for election in the next legislature. Now, let's remind everyone that Governor Brown herself and others walked out in 2001 to stop redistricting, which then caused the maps that we have today to be drawn, which gave the supermajority to the Democrats in Oregon. And so what's very poor about the way this measure is written is the way that the legislature works is that allows one person, which is the Speaker of the House or the Senate President, to decide on whether or not your absence is excused. One person. And so I could have 10 doctor's appointments, unfortunately, if I was ill, through the legislature and miss, or there could be 4 sessions that are scheduled, because it just says you have to, because that's when you're excused or not excused, that can occur at 6 o'clock at night or what have you, within those 160 days. And if the speaker decides to be a partisan individual, which could occur, and it has in the past, they could not excuse those absences. And it wouldn't matter if it was a walkout. It would just, if you miss 10 days of unexcused, you're not eligible. And that could be 2 days in the first 2 days of session because you were, gone or what have you. Because again, it's up to the speaker. And so what it should have been, at the very least, written is it's 10 consecutive days of if they were trying to prevent walkouts, it should have been 10 consecutive days. So I hope the measure goes down because lastly, it's really a tool of the minority to make sure that a supermajority doesn't ram things through that doesn't benefit all Oregonians. And I'm elected to represent the constituents of District 1. And when we use that tool, I can wholeheartedly tell you that the majority of the constituents of District 1 did not want cap and trade. I know because I again was the lead in our caucus regarding it. And we had an amendment that would have, I had dozens of amendments for cap and trade, but we had an amendment that would have been a referral to the people, and the majority party refused to allow the people to vote on that. So I'm adamantly opposed to that measure.
Well, thank you for answering all of the questions, and this is now your opportunity to make your 2-minute closing statement.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to the League for allowing these to occur and the opportunity to be able to talk to the individuals and the constituents that will see this. It's, again, been a privilege and honor to serve you in the Oregon House of Representatives, running for re-election to continue that work for you in the House and continue the roles that I have in leadership, not only in my caucus, but in the legislature. Those relationships that we form with not only your colleagues from your side of the aisle, but the other are critically important to be successful for the people that you work for in your district. And I feel that I have had the opportunity to build those relationships and look forward to continuing this work to make better opportunities for the individuals in District 1 in areas of job and growing the opportunities for good family wage paying jobs, bolstering our existing workforce and businesses while providing for needed childcare, healthcare, and other resources for our communities and their residents. So thank you again for the opportunity to serve you. Look forward to doing it for the next 2 years. And thank you to the League for the opportunity to have these conversations.